The mining station on Kepler 442b had been silent for 3 standard cycles when the distress beacon finally died. What remained was a skeletal framework of twisted metal and shattered dreams, abandoned by the Zephyrian collective when the ore veins ran dry. They had left behind their equipment, their waste, and one other thing they considered equally worthless: Crix. The feline alien crouched in the shadows of a collapsed storage bay, his once magnificent silver fur now matted and dull. Standing, nearly 7 feet tall on his hind legs, Crix belonged to the Feline species, known throughout the galaxy for their incredible strength, razor-sharp reflexes, and fierce independence. His people had been warriors and explorers long before the Zephyrians discovered their homeworld and conscripted them as laborers. Crix's amber eyes scanned the desolate landscape through a cracked viewport. The mining operation had stripped away most of the planet's natural beauty, leaving behind a scarred wasteland of excavated craters and toxic runoff. The air recyclers had failed 2 cycles ago, and now he could only survive by rationing the remaining oxygen canisters scattered throughout the facility. But oxygen wasn't his biggest problem. The parasites had started small, barely visible creatures that the Zephyrians had accidentally introduced from their homeworld. At first they seemed harmless, feeding on dead skin cells and organic waste. The alien overseers had dismissed them as a minor nuisance. But when the mining operation shut down and most life forms evacuated, the parasites had to adapt. They found Crix. The first signs appeared as small, itchy bumps beneath his fur. Crix had tried to ignore them, focusing instead on finding food and maintaining the life support systems. But the bumps grew larger, more painful. Soon he could feel something moving beneath his skin, burrowing deeper into his muscle tissue. The parasites were unlike anything in the galactic medical databases. They seemed to be a hybrid species, combining the worst traits of several different organisms. They reproduced rapidly, fed on living tissue, and released toxins that weakened their host's immune system. Worse yet, they appeared to be evolving, becoming more aggressive with each generation. Crix's powerful claws, once capable of rending steel, now trembled as he tried to scratch away the infestations. His incredible healing factor, a trait that had made his species valuable to the Zephyrians, was being overwhelmed by the sheer number of parasites. Every time his body tried to repair the damage, the creatures simply burrowed deeper. The isolation was driving him to desperation. Feline were social creatures despite their reputation for independence. They formed strong bonds with their packmates and thrived on companionship. Being alone on this dead world, fighting a losing battle against an invisible enemy, was slowly breaking his spirit. He had tried everything he could think of. The medical bay had been stripped bare when the Zephyrians left, taking all useful equipment with them. The remaining diagnostic tools were either broken or lacked power. He'd attempted to burn the parasites out with heat, freeze them with coolant, even expose them to radiation from the reactor core. Nothing worked. Each day brought new horrors. The parasites were spreading faster now, creating visible lumps that moved beneath his fur like living tumors. They had reached his internal organs, and he could feel them affecting his breathing, his digestion, his very thoughts. The toxins they produced caused hallucinations and made it difficult to concentrate. Crix spent his waking hours in a haze of pain and confusion, stumbling through the empty corridors of the mining station. He spoke to imaginary companions, held conversations with shadows, and sometimes forgot where he was entirely. The proud warrior who had once led mining teams through dangerous excavations was reduced to a shambling wreck. But even in his deteriorating state, Crix refused to give up entirely. Some deep instinct kept him moving, kept him searching for a solution. He monitored the communication arrays, hoping against hope that someone might answer his distress calls. He maintained what systems he could, knowing that if rescue ever came, they would need life support and landing facilities. The galaxy had written off Kepler 442b as a dead world, worthless now that its resources were exhausted. The major spacefaring civilizations had no reason to venture into this remote system. Pirates avoided it because there was nothing left to steal. Merchants had no goods to trade. Even the scavenger crews had picked the station clean months ago. As Crix collapsed in the main corridor, his strength finally failing, he wondered if this was how his story would end. Alone in pain, on a world that no one cared about. The parasites writhed beneath his skin, and he could feel them spreading to his brain, affecting his motor functions and memory. He thought of his homeworld, of the great crystal cities that rose above the forest canopies. He remembered running with his pack through the silver-leafed trees, hunting and playing in the eternal twilight of their world's twin suns. Those days seemed like a dream now, a beautiful fantasy from someone else's life. The communication array crackled with static, the same endless white noise that had been his only companion for cycles. But as consciousness faded, Crix thought he heard something different in the static. A pattern, perhaps. A signal. Or maybe it was just another hallucination brought on by the parasite's toxins. As darkness closed in around him, Crix's last coherent thought was a simple prayer to the ancient gods of his people, that if death was coming for him, it would at least be swift. The parasites had other plans, but that was a horror for another day. The mining station continued its slow orbit around the dying star, carrying its lone occupant deeper into despair. But unknown to Crix, his prayers were about to be answered in a way he never could have imagined. The signal that Crix had dismissed as another hallucination was very real. 3 sectors away, a battered human cargo hauler called the Wandering Spirit picked up the faint distress beacon. The ship's communications officer, a young woman named Sarah Chen, frowned at her displays as she tried to clean up the transmission. "Captain Torres," she called across the bridge, "I'm getting something weird on the emergency frequencies. Looks like a distress call from the Kepler system." Captain Maria Torres looked up from her navigation charts, her weathered face showing skepticism. "Kepler 442? That system's been dead for months. The Zephyrian stripped it clean and moved on." "I know, sir, but the signal's definitely coming from there. It's automated, cycling every 6 hours. Someone or something is still alive on that mining station." Torres walked over to examine Sarah's console. The Wandering Spirit was an independent freight hauler, one of hundreds that scratched out a living on the rim of civilized space. They carried cargo that the big shipping companies wouldn't touch, traveled routes that were too dangerous or unprofitable for corporate vessels, and occasionally rescued stranded travelers when they could afford to. The problem was, they usually couldn't afford to. "What's our cargo situation?" Torres asked her first officer, a grizzled veteran named Jackson Burke. "We're carrying medical supplies to the Arcturus colonies," Burke replied. "Time-sensitive stuff. Vaccines, surgical equipment, emergency rations. If we detour to Kepler, we'll be at least a week behind schedule." Torres studied the navigation display, calculating fuel costs and time delays. The Arcturus run was their bread and butter, a reliable contract that paid just enough to keep the ship running and the crew fed. Missing the delivery deadline would mean penalties, possibly losing the contract entirely. But there was another factor to consider. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's medic, had been listening to the conversation from her position at the science station. She was technically just a passenger, paying for transport to Arcturus where she planned to set up a clinic for frontier colonists. But her presence on the ship had already proved invaluable during their journey. "Captain," Elena said quietly, "I'd like to hear that distress signal." Sarah patched the transmission through the bridge speakers. The message was fragmented, corrupted by distance and interference, but Elena could make out enough to understand the situation. Someone was trapped on the mining station, dying from what sounded like some kind of parasitic infection. Elena Vasquez was not your typical doctor. She had spent 15 years working in disaster zones, conflict areas, and frontier colonies, where advanced medical technology was a luxury they couldn't afford. She had developed a reputation for finding creative solutions to impossible medical problems, using whatever resources were available. More importantly, she had never been able to walk away from someone who needed help. "That's a Felinar on that station," Elena told the captain. "I can tell from the vocal patterns in the distress call. They're describing symptoms that sound like a parasitic infection, possibly multiple species working in symbiosis." Torres knew enough about alien physiology to understand the implications. Felinar had incredibly robust immune systems and natural healing abilities. If parasites were successfully colonizing a Felinar host, they had to be something extraordinary. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but we have obligations to our current cargo. Those vaccines are needed on Arcturus, and people will die if we don't deliver them on time." Elena nodded, understanding the captain's position, but she also knew something about the human tendency to find solutions where others saw only problems. "What if we could do both?" she suggested. "The Kepler system is only slightly off our route. We could drop me off at the mining station, let me assess the situation and provide what help I can, then pick me up on the return trip." Burke shook his head. "Too risky. We don't know what kind of parasites we're dealing with. They could be contagious, dangerous to humans, or they could be completely harmless to human physiology," Elena countered. "Many parasites are species-specific, and if they're not, well, that's a risk I'm willing to take." The bridge fell silent as Torres considered the proposal. She looked at her crew, seeing the conflict in their faces. They were all practical people who understood the harsh realities of life in space. But they were also human, and humans had a peculiar weakness for lost causes. "The mining station still has life support?" Torres asked Sarah. "According to the beacon, yes. Minimal power, recycled atmosphere, but functional. And our medical supplies?" Elena consulted her inventory pad. "I've got a portable diagnostic kit, basic surgical tools, antibiotics, antiparasitic drugs, and a few experimental treatments I've been developing. Nothing too advanced, but it might be enough." Torres made her decision with the kind of split-second judgment that had kept her crew alive through a dozen dangerous situations. "Sarah, plot a course for Kepler 442b. Burke, calculate our fuel consumption and time delay. Elena, start preparing your medical kit." The crew sprang into action, and within hours the wandering spirit was adjusting course toward the abandoned mining system. As they traveled, Elena studied everything she could find about Feline physiology and known parasitic infections in the galactic medical databases. What she found was not encouraging. The databases contained dozens of case studies involving parasitic infections in various alien species, but most had resulted in death when advanced medical facilities weren't available. The parasites that had adapted to survive in hostile environments were typically the most dangerous ones. But Elena had learned long ago not to rely solely on textbook knowledge. Every patient was unique. Every situation presented its own challenges and opportunities. The key was to remain flexible, creative, and never give up as long as the patient was still breathing. As the wandering spirit dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler 442b, the crew got their first look at the devastated world. The mining operation had left massive scars on the planet's surface, and the orbital stations showed clear signs of hasty abandonment. "There," Sarah pointed to the largest station. "That's where the beacon's coming from." Torres opened a channel. "Unknown station. This is Captain Torres of the merchant vessel Wandering Spirit. We received your distress call and are responding. Please identify yourself and your situation." The response was weak, barely audible through the static, but Elena's trained ear caught the desperation in the voice, the growing weakness that indicated a patient running out of time. "My name is Crix," the voice said. "I am dying. Please help me." Elena was already suiting up for the transfer to the station. She had no idea what she would find there, or whether her human medical knowledge would be any use in treating an alien patient. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to try. The docking bay of the mining station was a nightmare of neglect and decay. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across scattered debris, and the air recycling system wheezed with the effort of maintaining a breathable atmosphere. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped carefully through the airlock, her portable medical kit slung across her shoulder and a handheld scanner sweeping for life signs. The scanner led her through twisted corridors filled with the detritus of hasty evacuation. Equipment lay abandoned where it had fallen, and in some places she could see the dark stains where leaking chemicals had eaten through the deck plating. The Zephyrians had clearly cared nothing for the environmental impact of their departure. She found Crix in what had once been the main communications center, collapsed against a bank of flickering monitors. Elena's first sight of him made her breath catch. Even through the matted fur and obvious illness, she could see that he had once been magnificent. Feline were impressive creatures under the best circumstances, but Crix must have been exceptional even by his species standards. Now he was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. The parasitic infestations were visible even through his thick fur, creating moving bulges and discolored patches across his body. Some areas showed open wounds where he had clawed at himself in desperation. "Crix?" Elena called softly, kneeling beside him. "My name is Dr. Vasquez. I'm here to help you." His amber eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus on her face. When recognition dawned, she saw a mixture of hope and disbelief that nearly broke her heart. "Human," he whispered in accented standard. "But humans do not come to dead worlds." "This human does," Elena replied, already unpacking her diagnostic equipment. "Can you tell me how long you've been infected?" As Crick struggled to explain his situation, Elena ran her scanners over his body. The readings were worse than she had feared. The parasites weren't just feeding on his tissue. They were fundamentally altering his biochemistry. They had formed a complex ecosystem within his body, with different species occupying different organs and systems. The most disturbing discovery was that the parasites seemed to be communicating with each other. Her biochemical scanner detected pheromone trails and electrical impulses that suggested a primitive collective intelligence. They weren't just random invaders. They were organized. "The pain comes in waves," Crix explained, his voice growing weaker. "At first, only at night. Now always. They move inside me, changing me. I can feel them thinking." Elena studied her scan results, her mind racing through possible treatments. Traditional antiparasitic drugs would be useless against this kind of organized infestation. Worse, the parasites seemed to have triggered adaptive responses in Crix's immune system that were actually helping them survive. "Crix, I need to ask you something important. Have you tried to remove them surgically?" "Cut them out?" He nodded weakly. "Many times. They burrow deeper when threatened, and they heal the wounds they make, but not correctly. They change the healing." That explained the scar tissue she was seeing on her scans. The parasites were actually hijacking his natural healing abilities, using them to strengthen their own positions within his body. It was a level of biological sophistication that Elena had never encountered. She spent the next several hours running every test her equipment could perform, building a complete picture of the infestation. The parasites had colonized his digestive system, respiratory tract, circulatory system, and were now spreading into his nervous system. In human terms, he should have been dead weeks ago, but Felinar physiology was remarkably resilient. His body was fighting a constant battle against the invaders, winning just enough small victories to keep him alive while slowly losing the war. The parasites were patient, gradually wearing down his defenses rather than overwhelming them quickly. Elena opened a communication channel to the wandering spirit. "Captain Torres, I need to speak with you." "Go ahead, Doc. How's our patient?" "He's alive, but barely. This is unlike anything I've seen before. The parasites have formed a symbiotic network within his body. Standard treatments won't work. So what are you saying? There's nothing you can do?" Elena looked at Crix, who was watching her with eyes that held more intelligence and awareness than she had initially realized. Despite his condition, despite the toxins affecting his brain, he understood enough to know she was discussing his fate. "I'm saying I need time to think. There might be a way, but it's going to require some creative problem solving." Over the next day, Elena worked tirelessly to understand the parasite's life cycle and behavior patterns. She collected samples, analyzed their chemical signatures, and even managed to isolate individual specimens for study. What she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The parasites weren't just adapted to survive in hostile environments. They were adapted to turn their hosts into more suitable environments. They were terraforming Crix's body from the inside out, reshaping his biochemistry to better serve their needs. But Elena noticed something else in her data. The parasites' collective behavior followed predictable patterns. They had weak points in their communication network, moments when their coordination faltered. If she could disrupt their ability to work together, she might be able to turn Crix's own immune system against them. The solution, when it came to her, was elegantly simple in concept but terrifyingly complex in execution. She would need to poison Crix just enough to force the parasites into defensive mode, disrupting their network, then hit them with a targeted treatment while they were disorganized. It was the kind of treatment that required precise timing, constant monitoring, and a level of risk that would make any medical ethics board cringe. One mistake in dosage or timing could kill him just as surely as the parasites would. Elena explained the procedure to Crix, outlining both the potential benefits and the very real dangers. His response was immediate and unequivocal. "Do it," he said. "I would rather die fighting than waste away like this." As Elena prepared her equipment for the most dangerous medical procedure of her career, she couldn't help but think about the human tendency to attempt the impossible. Other species might have given up on Crix as a lost cause, written him off as another casualty of the galaxy's harsh realities, but humans had a peculiar stubbornness when it came to lost causes. They had a history of refusing to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. Elena had no idea if her treatment would work, but she knew she had to try. The lives of both doctor and patient now hung in the balance, dependent on precise timing and a little bit of the luck that humans had always relied on, when science wasn't quite enough. Elena's hands moved with practiced precision as she prepared the treatment cocktail. The procedure required 3 separate compounds that she would have to administer in exact sequence. A metabolic disruptor to throw the parasites into defensive mode, a targeted neurotoxin to interfere with their communication network, and finally a modified antibiotic that would work in conjunction with Crix's immune system. The dosages were critical. Too little, and the parasites would adapt and become even stronger. Too much, and she would kill Crix before the treatment had a chance to work. She had calculated the amounts based on his body mass and metabolic rate, but Feline physiology was different enough from human that she was essentially guessing. "Are you ready?" she asked Crix, who was now lying on an improvised medical table she had constructed from mining equipment. He nodded, his amber eyes clear despite the toxins coursing through his system. "Doctor, if this fails, I want you to know that I am grateful. No one has shown me such kindness since I was abandoned here." Elena felt a tightness in her throat. She had treated thousands of patients over the years, but there was something about Crix's quiet dignity in the face of death that moved her deeply. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting to prove that his existence had meaning. "It's not going to fail," she said firmly, injecting the first compound into his bloodstream. Humans are notoriously stubborn about keeping their patients alive. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Crix's body went rigid as the metabolic disruptor hit his system, and Elena could see the parasites responding on her scanner. The organized movement patterns dissolved into chaos as the creatures went into emergency survival mode. But the chaos came with a price. Crix's vital signs spiked dangerously high as his body fought to process the foreign compound. His breathing became labored and she could see his muscles spasming as the parasites thrashed in their desperation. "Phase 1 complete," Elena muttered, preparing the neurotoxin. Beginning Phase 2. The second injection was even more dangerous. The neurotoxin was designed to interfere with the electrical impulses the parasites used to communicate, but it would also affect Crix's nervous system. She watched his brain activity on her scanner, looking for the precise moment when the parasite's network was most disrupted. There. The communication patterns collapsed completely, and Elena could see individual parasites acting independently, many of them actually working against each other. She immediately administered the third compound. The modified antibiotic was Elena's own creation, developed during her years working in frontier medicine. It was designed to enhance immune system responses while targeting specific biochemical markers. In theory, it would give Crix's body the tools it needed to fight back against the now disorganized parasites. For several terrifying minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Crix's vital signs remained dangerously unstable, and the parasites continued their chaotic movement. Elena monitored his condition constantly, ready to administer emergency medications if his system went into complete failure. Then, slowly, she began to see changes. Crix's immune system, freed from the parasite's coordinated suppression, started to rally. White blood cell counts increased dramatically. His natural healing factors began working properly for the first time in months. But the real breakthrough came when Elena noticed that the parasites themselves were beginning to die off. Without their collective intelligence to guide them, they were vulnerable to Crix's enhanced immune responses. Many were actually destroying each other in their confusion. "It's working," Elena whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Crix, your body is fighting back." Over the next 12 hours, Elena maintained a constant vigil beside her patient. The treatment was working, but slowly and with dangerous setbacks. Twice, Crix's system nearly crashed as his body tried to process the massive die-off of parasitic tissue. Each time, Elena managed to stabilize him with careful adjustments to his medication regimen. The most critical moment came when the parasites in his brain began to die. The toxins released by their death triggered violent seizures that threatened to cause permanent neurological damage. Elena had to make split-second decisions about medications and dosages, relying on instinct and experience rather than established protocols. But Crix was stronger than even Elena had hoped. His Feline physiology, once freed from parasitic interference, proved remarkably adaptable. His body not only survived the treatment, but seemed to be actively helping with the healing process. By the end of the first day, the change was visible. The moving bulges beneath his fur had stopped writhing. His breathing was steadier and his eyes were clearer. Most importantly, he was able to speak coherently for the first time since Elena had arrived. "The voices in my head," he said weakly. "They are gone. The constant whispers. The feeling that I was not alone in my own thoughts. It is quiet now." Elena ran another full-body scan and the results exceeded her most optimistic projections. Nearly 80% of the parasites were dead or dying. The survivors were scattered and disorganized, easily handled by Crix's recovering immune system. "You're going to live," she told him, unable to keep the satisfaction out of her voice. "You're going to make a full recovery." Crix tried to sit up, but Elena gently pushed him back down. "Not yet. Your body needs time to clear out all the dead tissue and toxins. We're going to take this slowly." "Doctor," Crix said, his voice stronger now but filled with emotion. "My people have legends about other species who help without expectation of reward." "We thought they were myths," Elena smiled. "Humans have a saying, because it's there. We climb mountains because they exist, we explore space because it's vast, and we help people because they need help. It's not always logical, but it's who we are." Over the following days, Elena continued to monitor Crix's recovery while maintaining communication with the wandering spirit. Captain Torres checked in regularly, updating her on their progress toward Arcturus and confirming the pickup schedule. Crix's healing was remarkable to witness. His natural regenerative abilities, once freed from parasitic interference, worked with incredible efficiency. Wounds that had festered for months began to close properly. His fur started to regain its natural luster, and his strength returned daily. But perhaps the most significant change was in his spirit. The despair and isolation that had nearly broken him were replaced by a quiet determination. He began helping Elena with small tasks around the medical bay, eager to contribute to his own recovery. "When I am well," he told her, "I would like to learn about human medicine. You have shown me techniques I never imagined possible." Elena was touched by his interest, but also realistic about the challenges ahead. "Crix, I have to ask, what will you do when you're recovered? This station is dead, and I don't know if any rescue ships will come." His response surprised her. "Doctor, if you are willing to teach, I would like to come with you. I have seen what humans can accomplish when they refuse to give up. I would be honored to learn from your people." As Elena considered his request, she realized that she had witnessed something extraordinary on this abandoned station. She had not just saved a life. She had discovered something important about the power of refusing to accept defeat. The treatment that had saved Crix was as much about human stubbornness as it was about medical science. The galaxy was full of species that were stronger, more advanced, or more numerous than humans. But Elena was beginning to understand that humans had something unique, an absolute refusal to abandon hope, even in the face of impossible odds. And sometimes that was exactly what the universe needed. 2 weeks after the initial treatment, Crix stood at the observation deck of the mining station, looking out at the scarred landscape of his prison-turned-sanctuary. His recovery had progressed beyond Elena's most optimistic projections. The parasites were completely eliminated, his wounds had healed without scarring, and his strength had returned to levels that impressed even him. But the most remarkable change wasn't physical. For the first time in months, Crix felt truly alive. The constant background noise of parasitic interference was gone, replaced by the clear, sharp awareness that was natural to his species. Colors seemed brighter, sounds were crisper, and his thoughts flowed with a clarity he had forgotten was possible. Elena joined him at the viewport, carrying a datapad with her final medical assessment. "Your latest scans are perfect," she reported. "No trace of parasitic activity. All organ functions normal, and your immune system is actually stronger than baseline. Whatever those parasites did to adapt your body, some of the changes seem to be beneficial." Crix nodded, still marveling at the simple pleasure of breathing without pain. Doctor, I have been thinking about what you said regarding human stubbornness. I believe I am beginning to understand. Oh? The Zephyrians abandoned this station because it was no longer profitable. Most species would have done the same. But humans came anyway, not for profit, but because someone needed help. That is a different kind of logic, Elena smiled. We're not always the most practical species in the galaxy, but sometimes impractical decisions lead to the best outcomes. Their conversation was interrupted by a communication from the wandering spirit. Captain Torres appeared on the main viewer, looking pleased but slightly harried. Doc, we've got good news and complicated news. The good news is we delivered the medical supplies to Arcturus ahead of schedule, and we're cleared for pickup at your location. The complicated news is that word about your patient has spread. Elena frowned. What do you mean? Turns out there are more survivors from abandoned mining operations than anyone realized. We've been getting distress calls from 3 other systems. All of them report similar parasitic infections. The Galactic Health Council wants to know how you treated them. Crix and Elena exchanged glances. The implications were staggering. If the parasites were spreading to other abandoned sites, they could potentially affect thousands of stranded beings across the Rim territories. Captain, Elena said, I need to speak with the Health Council directly. This isn't just about individual patients anymore. We might be looking at the beginning of a galaxy-wide parasitic outbreak. The communication with the Galactic Health Council took place 6 hours later, with representatives from dozens of species participating in the conference. Elena presented her findings about the parasites' collective intelligence and adaptive capabilities, while Crix provided first-hand testimony about the infection's progression. The reaction from the council was mixed. Some representatives were fascinated by Elena's unconventional treatment methods, while others questioned whether her techniques could be safely applied to other species. The Zephyrian delegate was notably defensive about his people's role in spreading the parasites. These organisms were present on multiple worlds before our mining operations began, the Zephyrian insisted. We cannot be held responsible for their evolution. Crix spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived the experience. Counselor, the parasites may have existed before, but your people's activities clearly accelerated their development. The mining operations created perfect conditions for them to adapt and spread. Elena supported his statement with her biological analysis. The parasites show clear signs of rapid evolution triggered by environmental stress. When their normal food sources were removed by the mining operations, they had to adapt to survive. The abandoned stations provided isolated laboratory conditions where they could evolve quickly. Dr. Helios, the council's chief medical officer, studied Elena's data with obvious interest. Dr. Vasquez, your treatment protocol is unprecedented. Using targeted metabolic disruption to break parasitic communication networks is theoretically sound, but the risk factors are enormous. The risk of doing nothing was greater, Elena replied. These parasites don't just kill their hosts. They turn them into breeding grounds for more advanced versions. If we don't develop effective treatments now, we could be facing something much worse in the future. The debate continued for hours, with representatives arguing about responsibility, treatment protocols, and resource allocation, but gradually a consensus emerged. The parasitic threat was real and growing, and Elena's treatment represented the best hope for developing effective countermeasures. Dr. Helios made the formal proposal. Dr. Vasquez, the council would like to offer you a position as head of the new Parasitic Disease Research Division. We need someone with your creativity and experience to coordinate treatment efforts across multiple species and environments. Elena looked at Crix, seeing the hope and concern in his amber eyes. She had already committed to helping him establish a new life. But this opportunity could help thousands of others facing similar situations. I accept with conditions, she said. First, I want Crix as my assistant and cultural liaison. His insights into the parasite's behavior have been invaluable. Second, I want the Wandering Spirit designated as our mobile laboratory. Captain Torres and her crew have proven they can handle dangerous medical missions. And third, Dr. Helios asked. Third, I want priority access to abandoned mining sites and industrial facilities. These parasites are evolving quickly, and we need to stay ahead of them. That means going to places where other people won't go. The council agreed to her terms, and within days, Elena found herself in charge of the galaxy's first dedicated parasitic disease response team. The wandering spirit was retrofitted with advanced medical equipment, and Crix began intensive training in xenobiology and comparative physiology. But perhaps the most important outcome was the paradigm shift in how the galaxy approached seemingly hopeless situations. Elena's success with Crix had demonstrated that creative thinking and stubborn determination could overcome challenges that seemed insurmountable. Other species began to take notice of human problem-solving methods. The concept of refusing to accept defeat, even when facing overwhelming odds, started to influence medical practices, engineering solutions, and even diplomatic negotiations across the galaxy. Crix, now serving as Elena's primary assistant, often found himself explaining human psychology to confused alien colleagues. They do not always choose the logical path, he would tell them, but their illogical choices sometimes lead to solutions that pure logic cannot reach. The first test of their new team came sooner than expected. A distress call arrived from the Kepler-186 system, where a group of crystalline researchers had been studying ancient ruins when a parasitic outbreak occurred. The infection was different from what Crix had experienced, but showed similar patterns of collective intelligence and adaptive behavior. Elena and Crix arrived to find a situation that would have challenged even the most advanced medical facilities. The parasites had somehow bonded with the crystalline's silicon-based biology, creating hybrid organisms that were part biological, part mineral. Traditional treatments were completely ineffective, but Elena's approach was different. Instead of trying to kill the parasites, she studied their integration with the crystalline hosts. She discovered that the organisms weren't just parasitic. They were attempting to form a new kind of symbiotic relationship. Working with Crix and the crystalline survivors, Elena developed a treatment that didn't eliminate the parasites but instead guided their evolution toward true symbiosis. The result was a new form of hybrid being that retained the best characteristics of both species while eliminating the harmful aspects of the infection. The success at Kepler-186 established Elena's reputation throughout the galaxy. Her team became the go-to solution for parasitic emergencies, but more importantly, they became symbols of the human approach to impossible problems. Word of their work reached the highest levels of galactic government. Species that had previously dismissed humans as a minor spacefaring race began to take notice of their unique problem-solving abilities. Trade agreements, research partnerships, and diplomatic relationships all began to shift in humanity's favor. Crix often reflected on the irony of his situation. He had been abandoned on a dead world, left to die by a species that saw him as worthless. Now he was traveling the galaxy as part of a team that saved lives and changed the course of interspecies relations. "Doctor," he said to Elena during one of their quieter moments aboard the Wandering Spirit, "I have learned something important about humans. You do not save people because you expect gratitude or reward. You save them because they need saving." Elena nodded. "It's not always easy and it doesn't always work out. But we've learned that sometimes the most important victories come from the battles everyone else has already given up on." As their reputation grew, Elena and Crix found themselves dealing with increasingly complex challenges. Parasitic infections that spanned multiple star systems, organisms that could adapt to completely alien biologies, and situations where the line between parasite and symbiont became impossibly blurred. Each case taught them something new about the resilience of life and the power of refusing to accept defeat. They developed new treatment protocols, trained other medical teams, and slowly built a network of specialists who shared their philosophy of never giving up on a patient. The galaxy was changing, and humans were playing an increasingly important role in that change, not because they were the strongest or most advanced species, but because they had something that many others lacked: an absolute refusal to accept that some problems were unsolvable. Crix had become living proof of that principle. From a dying alien abandoned on a worthless world, he had transformed into one of the galaxy's foremost experts on parasitic diseases. His insights into alien biology, combined with human determination and creativity, were saving lives across dozens of star systems. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed the concept of value. Crix had been discarded because he was no longer profitable to the Zephyrians. Elena had saved him not because he was valuable, but because he was alive and needed help. That distinction was beginning to reshape galactic civilization in ways that no one could have predicted. 5 years after their first meeting on the abandoned mining station, Elena and Crick stood before the Galactic Assembly, preparing to present their final report on the Parasitic Crisis Resolution Project. The Great Hall buzzed with representatives from hundreds of species, all gathered to hear about one of the most successful medical initiatives in galactic history. Elena looked out at the assembled delegates, remembering the skeptical faces she had encountered during that first emergency conference. Now those same beings were eager to learn about human medical techniques and the philosophy that drove them. "Honored delegates," she began, "when we started this project, we were facing what many considered an impossible situation. Parasitic outbreaks were spreading across the rim territories, affecting dozens of species with infections that seemed untreatable by conventional methods." Crick stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. His transformation from dying patient to respected scientist had become legendary throughout the galaxy. And his testimony carried enormous weight. "The parasites we encountered were not simply biological threats," he explained in his precise, measured voice. "They represented a new form of adaptive intelligence that challenged our understanding of life itself. Traditional medical approaches failed because they treated symptoms rather than understanding the underlying behavior patterns." Elena continued their presentation, detailing the 847 successful treatments their team had performed across 156 star systems. Each case had been unique, requiring creative solutions and often dangerous experimental procedures. But the overall success rate was unprecedented. 94.7% of patients had made full recoveries. More importantly, their work had led to fundamental advances in xenobiology, parasitology, and cross-species medicine. The protocols they developed were now being taught in medical schools across the galaxy, and their research had opened entire new fields of study. But the true measure of their success wasn't in statistics or scientific papers. It was in the lives that had been saved and the civilizations that had been preserved. Dr. Helios rose from the medical council's section. "Dr. Vasquez, your methods were often criticized as reckless and unscientific. How do you respond to those who claim you succeeded through luck rather than skill?" Elena smiled, an expression that had become familiar to beings across the galaxy. "Dr. Helios, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. We prepared by studying every case, learning from every failure, and refusing to accept that any situation was hopeless. The opportunity came from the courage of patients like Crick's, who were willing to risk experimental treatments rather than surrender to death." A Zephyrian delegate stood up, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights. "The Zephyrian Collective would like to formally acknowledge our role in creating the parasitic crisis. Our industrial practices inadvertently accelerated the evolution of these organisms. We have established a compensation fund for affected beings and have adopted new environmental protocols to prevent similar incidents." It was a remarkable admission from a species known for avoiding responsibility. The transformation in galactic attitudes toward accountability and ethical responsibility had been one of the unexpected outcomes of the crisis. Crick addressed the assembly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had experienced both abandonment and salvation. "Honored delegates, I speak not only as a scientist but as someone who was left to die because I was deemed worthless. Dr. Vasquez and her team did not save me because I had value to them. They saved me because they believe all life has inherent worth." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "This principle has guided our work throughout the crisis. We did not choose patients based on their political importance or economic value. We helped them because they needed help. This human concept of universal compassion has proven more effective than any medical technology." The response from the assembly was unprecedented. Beings who had spent centuries focused on profit, efficiency, and species advancement were beginning to understand the power of simple compassion. Trade policies were being revised to include humanitarian considerations. Resource allocation formulas now factored in quality of life measurements alongside economic indicators. Elena was asked to explain the philosophical foundations of human medical ethics. "We have a saying," she told the assembly, "first do no harm. But we've learned that sometimes doing no harm means taking enormous risks to help someone who has no other options." "You mean the principle of acceptable risk?" suggested a Vorthon representative. "No," Elena replied. "I mean the principle of refusing to let people die if there's any chance of saving them. Risk assessment is important, but it can never become an excuse for abandoning hope." The final presentation included testimony from dozens of former patients, beings from across the galaxy who had been saved by Elena's team. Each story was unique, but they all shared common themes: desperate situations, unconventional treatments, and the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. A young Aquarian researcher spoke about how the team had developed underwater surgical techniques to treat parasites in her people's gill systems. An elderly Torellian described the experimental consciousness transfer procedure that had saved him when parasites invaded his neural network. A group of silicon-based Christarchs explained how their entire species had been preserved through a treatment that no other race would have attempted. As the testimonies concluded, the Assembly's Secretary-General called for the final vote on Resolution 2847, the Universal Medical Assistance Accord. The resolution would establish Elena's protocols as standard practice across all member civilizations and create a permanent, rapid response team for medical emergencies. The vote was unanimous. Elena felt a familiar tightness in her throat as she watched the results appear on the chamber's displays. 5 years ago, she had been a frontier doctor paying for passage to a remote colony. Now she was watching the galaxy adopt human values of compassion and determination as official policy. Crix placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Doctor, you have accomplished something extraordinary. You have not just saved lives. You have changed how an entire galaxy thinks about the value of life." "We accomplished it," Elena corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you, without Captain Torres and her crew, without all the patients who trusted us with their lives." After the ceremony, Elena and Crix returned to the Wandering Spirit, which had become both their home and their mobile laboratory. Captain Torres greeted them at the airlock, grinning broadly. "So, Doc, ready for your next impossible case? We've got a distress call from the Andromeda contact zone. Some kind of interdimensional parasites that are affecting the fabric of space-time itself." Elena laughed, realizing that even galactic recognition hadn't changed the fundamental nature of their work. There would always be another impossible situation, another patient that everyone else had given up on. "Interdimensional parasites?" she mused. "Well, that's a new one. Crix, what do you think? Ready to expand our expertise into theoretical physics?" Crix's amber eyes gleamed with the intelligence and humor that had helped him survive his darkest moments. "Doctor, I have learned that impossible is simply a challenge that humans have not yet accepted. I believe we should investigate." As the Wandering Spirit departed for the edge of known space, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. She had set out to treat one dying alien on an abandoned mining station. Instead, she had helped reshape galactic civilization. But perhaps that was the most human thing of all: the tendency for small acts of compassion to have consequences far beyond their original scope. In a galaxy full of advanced civilizations and incredible technologies, sometimes the most powerful force was still the simple refusal to let someone die alone. The stars stretched endlessly ahead of them, and Elena knew that somewhere among them, someone was waiting for help that everyone else had deemed impossible to provide. For a human medical team equipped with determination, creativity, and an absolute refusal to give up, that was exactly the kind of challenge they lived for.